The year is 1865. The Civil War is over, but for black people in the South, the nightmare is just beginning. Masked riders gallop through the night, burning crosses and homes. Newly freed families huddle in terror as white robes and pointed hoods bring death to their doorsteps. Former enslaved people who dare to vote are found hanging from trees the next morning. The federal government promises protection, but their soldiers are scattered and outnumbered. Local sheriffs look the other way when they're not wearing the masks themselves. 4 million people have been declared free on paper, but freedom feels like a cruel joke when it comes with a noose around your neck. Black communities are isolated, terrorized, and defenseless. But then, a preacher from New Jersey steps off a boat in Georgia. His name is Tunis Campbell, and he's about to become every racist's worst nightmare. This man doesn't just bring hope. He brings organization, economic power, and a 300-strong militia ready to fight back. The terrorists thought they could break black spirits through fear. They were about to learn what real fear looked like. But let's rewind to where this legend began. April 1st, 1812, Middlebrook, New Jersey. While most black children in America were being born into chains, Tunis Campbell entered the world as one of 10 children born to free black parents. His father, John Campbell, was a blacksmith with calloused hands and an unshakable belief that freedom meant absolutely nothing without education. This man understood something that would make racists furious, that knowledge was the real key to power. When Tunis was just 5 years old, something extraordinary happened. A white friend of the family, and yes, they existed even back then, helped place this little black boy into an all-white Episcopal school in Babylon, New York. Think about that for a second. In 1817, while other black children were forbidden from even learning to read, this kid was sitting in classrooms with white students, absorbing the same knowledge, breathing the same air, proving every single day that the only difference between black and white children was opportunity. The irony is absolutely delicious. These white folks were literally training the very man who would become their worst nightmare. By the way, if you've enjoyed the content you've seen so far, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Let's help spread these black stories together, gang. As Tunis grew older, the American Colonization Society came knocking. They wanted to train him as a missionary to Liberia. Sounds noble, right? Wrong. This young man was too smart to fall for their game. See, the ACS had a slick little scheme going. They figured if they could convince free black people to pack up and move to Africa, they could keep slavery nice and comfortable for white folks back home. Ship away the free blacks, and the enslaved ones would have no one to look up to, no one to inspire them. But Tunis Campbell wasn't having any of that nonsense. At 18 years old, 18, this young man looked the American Colonization Society dead in the eye and said, "I will never leave this country until every slave is free on American soil." That's when America's racists should have started losing sleep, because they had just created their own monster. From 1832 to 1845, while he was busy dismantling slavery with his words, Campbell earned his living as a hotel steward in New York City. But this wasn't just any ordinary job. This man became the head waiter at the prestigious Howard Hotel. And what did he do with that position? He revolutionized the entire hospitality industry. Campbell created the first systematic training method for waiters in America. He developed signals, choreographed movements, and organized dining service like a military operation. Every server had a specific number of diners to serve. When he first introduced his system in 1837, white folks laughed at him. They literally laughed at this black man trying to tell them how to run their businesses better. But by 1848, those same white people were quietly adopting his methods and pretending they came up with them. Campbell was so confident in his system that he published it in a book called Hotel Keepers, Head Waiters, and Housekeepers Guide, the first book of its kind in America. But Campbell's real revolution was just getting started, because while he was perfecting the art of service, he was also perfecting the art of resistance. and America's racists were about to find out just how dangerous an educated, organized, and fearless black man could be. Then came January 1st, 1863, the day that changed everything. Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and suddenly 4 million enslaved people were legally free. But here's the thing about freedom on paper versus freedom in reality. There's a whole lot of space between those two things. And that's where Tunis Campbell stepped in. Uncle Sam came knocking on his door with a proposition that would have terrified most people. They needed someone who could organize, someone who could lead, someone who could take thousands of newly freed people and help them build actual lives in a country that absolutely did not want them to succeed. They needed someone exactly like Tunis Campbell. He received a commission to help resettle black refugees in South Carolina. But let's be clear about what this really was. This wasn't charity work or some feel-good mission. This was nation building. This was taking people who had been treated as property and helping them become landowners, voters, and citizens. By March 1865, Campbell had become an agent with the Freedmen's Bureau, and his assignment was absolutely massive. Supervise the resettlement of approximately 1,000 newly freed people on 5 Georgia islands. But Campbell looked at this assignment and saw something the government officials probably didn't expect. He saw an opportunity to create something that would make those racist folk lose their minds: black economic power. See, President Andrew Johnson, who was about as sympathetic to black rights as a rattlesnake, had started pardoning ex-Confederate landowners left and right. These former slaveholders were coming back to reclaim the very land that black people had been promised. But Tunis Campbell was 10 steps ahead of that game. This brilliant man shrewdly purchased over 1,000 acres in Georgia's McIntosh County with his own money and resources. Then, he created an association of black landowners who would divide up parcels and profit from the land together. Campbell took the government's promise of 40 acres and a mule and turned it into a real estate empire run by and for black people. By 1868, Campbell and over 200 formerly enslaved people had created a thriving fishing and farming community on St. Catherine's Island. This was a self-sufficient black town with its own economy, its own leadership, and its own vision for the future. And at the center of it all was Tunis Campbell, the preacher turned revolutionary who understood that real freedom meant economic independence. The man who looked at Reconstruction and said, "We're not just rebuilding America, we're building it better." But if racists thought Campbell was done shocking them, they had another thing coming. Because this black preacher was about to enter the political arena and show them what real power looked like. While Campbell was building his black economic empire, he realized something crucial. Land ownership meant nothing if you couldn't protect it politically. So this man did what terrified racists more than anything else. He started registering black people to vote. Campbell traveled throughout southeastern Georgia with a simple but revolutionary message: you are free, you are citizens, and citizens vote. The response was incredible. Black people who had never been allowed to make decisions about their own bodies were suddenly lining up to make decisions about their government. And they weren't just voting for anyone, they were voting for Tunis Campbell. But here's what really made white racists panic. Campbell wasn't just participating in the political system, he was dominating it. As a state senator, Campbell introduced 15 bills aimed at advancing black rights. This man wasn't tiptoeing around white feelings or asking politely for crumbs. He was demanding the full meal. He fought for equal education because he knew that keeping black children ignorant was how the white elite stayed in power. He demanded integrated juries because all white juries weren't delivering justice. They were delivering lynchings with legal paperwork. Campbell pushed for voting protections at polling places because white terrorists were showing up to intimidate black voters with guns and ropes. He advocated for fair labor contracts because sharecropping was just slavery wearing a business suit. And when the Klan started terrorizing his community, this fearless man did something that took incredible courage. He testified against them to a congressional committee. Can you imagine? a black man in the 1860s, sitting in front of white congressmen, describing in detail how this terrorist group was murdering and terrorizing black families. But Campbell wasn't just talking about the problem, he was solving it. He built a 300-strong African-American militia to protect his community from these racist attacks. While other black communities were being terrorized into submission, Campbell's people were armed and ready. The white folk in Georgia were watching this in absolute horror. Here was a black man who wasn't just demanding his rights, he was taking them. And he had the political power, economic resources, and military protection to back it up. But white America had seen enough. In 1868, after Campbell had been serving effectively in the Georgia Senate, his opponents made a move that perfectly captured their desperation and their racism. They voted that his skin color alone disqualified him from holding political office. Let that sink in. Not his qualifications, not his performance, not his character, his skin color. Most politicians would have quietly accepted this injustice and gone home. Most people would have recognized that they were outnumbered and outgunned. But Tunis Campbell wasn't most people. This man stood up in that Senate chamber, looked around at all those white faces twisted with hatred, saw their hands moving toward their weapons, and made a decision that defined his entire legacy. He started talking, and he didn't stop. For 7 consecutive days, Campbell held the floor of the Georgia Senate. 7 days with guns pointed at him. 7 days of racial slurs and death threats. 7 days of white senators losing their absolute minds because this black man refused to shut up and sit down. He wasn't just arguing for his right to hold office. He was arguing for the right of black people to exist as full human beings in America. After the 8th day, Campbell did something that showed his political genius. Instead of waiting for these racist senators to escalate to violence, he traveled to Washington, D.C. to petition the federal government. And it worked. Campbell was reinstated as a Georgia state senator with federal troops backing him up. Can you imagine the rage of those white Southerners? By 1872, white racists couldn't beat Campbell at the ballot box, so they changed the rules. They stripped him of his Senate seat through fraudulent elections filled with voter intimidation. But Campbell continued as justice of the peace, holding white people accountable for crimes against black people. When white landowners mistreated black workers, Campbell fined them. In 1876, Campbell defended black sailors being cheated by white shipowners in Darien, Georgia. That's when the trap was sprung. Campbell was arrested on trumped-up charges of malfeasance in office. Historians call what happened next a judicial lynching, using courts to destroy someone when you can't beat them any other way. This 64-year-old preacher was sentenced to 1 year of hard labor. His appeals to the governor and President Grant fell on deaf ears. Campbell spent 9 months in Savannah jail, then a year in a chain gang. At 65, broken by chain gangs but unbroken in spirit, he continued fighting for black rights until his death in 1891. But revolution doesn't die with the revolutionary. Back in Georgia, Campbell's work created lasting change. McIntosh County remained a black political stronghold for 40 years. His economic models for black land ownership became blueprints for civil rights leaders 100 years later. Campbell had influenced the 15th Amendment protecting voting rights. Every black person who votes exercises rights. Campbell helped write into the Constitution. Every voter suppression tactic we see today, Campbell fought in the 1860s. Every attempt to deny black political power, he faced and overcame. Every excuse to criminalize black success, they used against him. Campbell's descendants still honor him with annual celebrations in Brunswick, Georgia. But his real descendants are every black person who refuses to accept limitations on their humanity. Tunis Campbell didn't just survive Reconstruction, he dominated it. While others were terrorized into silence, he built armies. While others begged for scraps, he created wealth and power. While others whispered, he roared for 7 days in the face of death. They could strip his Senate seat, but not his influence. They could chain gang him, but not his ideas. They could exile him from Georgia, but not his revolution from people's hearts. Campbell understood that the price of liberation is everything you have, and it's worth paying. Today, every black voter walks in Campbell's footsteps. Every black politician channels his spirit. Every activist demanding justice continues his revolution. Campbell proved one fearless black man could terrify an entire system built on America's racist power structure. He proved excellence could overcome hatred. He proved the arc of justice needs revolutionaries to bend it toward freedom. And when we refuse to be afraid, when we organize our communities, when we vote despite intimidation, when we run for office despite threats, when we demand our full rights as human beings, we become the continuation of his revolution. That's why they tried so hard to make us forget Tunis Campbell. But we remember, and we continue the fight, because the revolution isn't over. It's just getting started.